morning, everyone. This is John McDermott at the Institute for Human Development at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona, and welcome to the Arizona Works webinar. We're happy to collaborate with the Arizona Works team here in Arizona, and we'd like to go over some housekeeping things for the webinar prior to handing it off. What you should see is this participant layout for the webinar. This is the Adobe Connect platform, and you'll see the main share screen to the left, the chat column in the middle where you can put questions for the presenters, and then the attendees list on the right-hand side. It looks like we're sort of getting some late-coming attendees or participants, so we'll just go from here, and I'll hand it off to the Arizona Works team.
Good morning, all. This is Linda Tasco with the Division of Developmental Disabilities here in Arizona. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome each of you to this webinar introducing Arizona's Employment First initiative. We absolutely certainly appreciate the interest in this topic, so much so that we reached capacity within 2 days of announcing the webinar. We know that there are many who wanted to but were unable to register, so let me start out by saying that we want everyone to know we are recording today's event, and we will make the link available to everyone no later than Friday. And if you like what you hear today and you want to hear it again or share it with your staff or with others, again, we will be sending you that link. This morning, you're going to hear from several presenters. First will be the State Employment Leadership Network. They'll be talking about and sharing why it's critical that Arizona begin its Employment First journey now, sharing both national and Arizona state-specific data. Then it'll be my turn to talk about what Employment First is and what is currently available to us here in Arizona to support our efforts. Then you'll hear from two family members. You'll hear from Ms. Melissa Van Hook and Ms. Margaret Corcoran-Smith. I'll share why they support integrated employment as an option for their sons and daughters. You'll also hear the perspective of a division employment services provider, Mr. Mark Jacoby, who is the executive director of Gompers Habilitation Center. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Michael Leyva of the Arizona Developmental Disability Planning Council will share next steps, including how each of you can support Arizona's journey. So with that being said, let's get started. Please welcome Ms. Allison Cohen-Hall, who is a State Employment Leadership Network team member from the University of Massachusetts, Boston's Institute for Community Inclusion. That's a mouthful, Allison. And also welcome Ms. Janine Zlocki, who is also an SELN team member from the National Association of State Developmental Disabilities Directors Association. Another mouthful. Ladies, the screen is all yours.
Can everybody hear me? Linda,
Yes.
Can you hear me and other presenters?
Yes,
Loud and clear. Everyone else is muted. Okay, great. This is Allison Hall, and as Linda said, I'm from the State Employment Leadership Network, and I'm going to provide a national context so you can see what's going on with employment around the country, and then we'll talk a little bit about where Arizona fits into that national context. So how many people are employed? It looks like a simple question, but it's not necessarily that simple to answer, and we have a couple of different data sets that each provide a different window into answering that question. The ACS is the American Community Survey, and that's designed by the U.S. Census, and that has information on people with disabilities that's not based on service data, but it's based on population data. So people answer 6 questions regarding long-lasting conditions and functional impairment. A cognitive disability means that a person answered yes to because of physical, mental, or emotional condition. A person has serious difficulty remembering, concentrating, or making decisions. So the closest proxy that we have for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities is a person who said, yes, they have a cognitive disability, and they also receive SSI. So that data tells us that 8.6% of those individuals are employed. Then we have national core indicator data. Currently, about 29 states are participating. Arizona is included in that data collection effort that looks at personal outcomes, family outcomes, and health care and system outcomes. And that's a collaboration of NASDs, with the mouthful that Linda was just talking about, the organization that Janine represents, and the Human Services Research Institute. So that data tells us that about 13.4% of people receiving ID services from their IDD agency are employed. And then finally, we have the Institute for Community Inclusion's national data collection effort, which surveys all IDD state agencies, and that's longitudinal data that looks at trends in what service categories individuals spend their time in. So are they in facility-based, community-based work, or non-work, and also looks at funding sources and allocations of funding across day and employment services. So that our data says that 18.4% of individuals who are served by IDD agencies are in integrated employment. So you can see that how many people are employed. There's there's at least 3 different answers to it. And this next slide is ICI National Survey of the state IDD agencies. We just call that our IDD survey. You can see that total served has been increasing since about 1990, and integrated employment has been fairly consistent. So you can see total services is growing, and integrated employment peaked in about 2001 and has been fairly flat ever since. So that's what the nation looks like. The next slide is what Arizona looks like. Overall, you can see the trend line for total served has its dips and valleys, but on the whole is increasing. And again, integrated employment is fairly steady. This next slide is participation in integrated employment services, and essentially the message here is that it varies widely across states. The yellow bar in the middle looks to be, right about smack in the middle at 20%, and that's Arizona. Arizona is actually a bit higher than the national average, which this year we calculated to be about 18.4%. So the good news is Arizona is slightly higher than the national average. This next slide looks at the challenge of investment. So on a national level, 81% of the services provided to people with IDD are either facility-based and non-work services. Only 19% of the services provided are integrated employment services. And then we look at how services are funded. 89% of the total funding for day and employment services goes to facility-based, which means sheltered employment or rehabilitation programs, or non-work, which also includes community-based non-work, like going out into the community, volunteering. But 89% of the funding is spent on that, while only 11% of the funding is spent on integrated employment. So you can see that the vast majority of services that are provided are facility-based and non-work services, and the vast amount of the funding goes towards facility-based and non-work services. The next slide is Arizona, and you can see that Arizona, again, does a little bit better than the national average. About 80% of services are facility-based and non-work, and about 20% are integrated employment. But still funding, 86% of all the funding for day and employment services in Arizona goes towards facility-based and non-work services, and only 14% of the funding goes towards integrated employment. Another challenge is that non-work is growing. So non-work is anything that's not paid employment. So community-based non-work is doing some recreational or other activities in the community, and facility-based non-work, again, is more like rehabilitation services. So you can see that integrated employment has been fairly consistent across time. Facility, an interesting point is that And then kind of on the good news side is that facility-based work is declining. So sheltered employment is on the decline over time. But what's really growing is non-work. That's community-based and facility-based services. Those are non-work services that are increasing at a obviously much faster pace than integrated employment. And our data shows what's really increasing is community-based non-work. This is a service category that's expanding, that we don't necessarily know what states are counting when they call a service community-based non-work, so we are doing some more in-depth work in this area. Another challenge is what service categories younger adults are in. National Core Indicator NCI data suggests that the greatest number of young adults are in facility-based non-work. That's all the way on the right, that red bar. So the biggest category here for where young adults are is facility-based non-work. Then the next largest category is community-based non-work, then facility-based work or sheltered workshops, and then integrated employment or a community job. So we see that integrated employment, the category of integrated employment services, is the smallest category of service for young adults. So that presents itself as a challenge. Another challenge is self-sufficiency. This slide shows wages over 2 weeks. You can see that obviously competitive employment, individual supported employment, and group supported employment all make significantly higher wages than facility-based work, than sheltered workshops. However, what you don't see on this slide, but what is present in NCI data, is also that the people surveyed who did have a paid community job on average had an annual salary that was almost half of the U.S. individual poverty level. So we can see that even when individuals are working in the community, they're not necessarily earning enough money to sustain themselves above the poverty level. This is more data from the National Core Indicators Project, and this is national data. So this data set says that about 13.3% of the people are in integrated employment, and within that 13.3%, 7.4% are in individual jobs, 2.9% are in group-supported employment, and then less than half a percent in self-employment. So that's the national picture. The next slide is where Arizona is. So this data set says that about 21% of the individuals surveyed worked in integrated. Within that 21%, 9% had individual jobs, 4% were in group-supported employment, and then 8% were in an unknown job type. This next slide talks about choice, and I'll walk you through what the percentages and the numbers mean. Basically, the big takeaway from this slide is that almost half, 46% of the people interviewed who did not have a paid job in the community said that they wanted one. So half the people interviewed said they didn't have a job, but they wanted one. Furthermore, only 26% of the people who didn't have a paid job and said that they wanted one had this goal in their individual service plan. So you see only 13.4% of the individuals overall are working, and there's a huge number of people who don't have a job but want one, and that they don't have a goal of employment in their ISP. These last couple of slides talk about some of the benefits that people experience, people who are working in the community experience. This slide is working people are more active in their communities, and that's measured by how often they go shopping, how often they go out for entertainment, out to eat, go to religious services, and out for exercise. So you can see on all of the categories, people who are working in the community have higher participation in these activities than people who are not working in the community. The next slide, working people are more likely to choose for themselves, and those are in categories such as choose where they live, who their staff is, who their roommates are, what they do during the day, their case manager. Again, consistently across the board, we see that people who work in the community also on these other domains are more likely to choose for themselves. And then finally, working people have greater freedom. There's less of a contrast between the two groups. The two groups meaning people who are working in paid jobs and people who are not working in paid jobs. It's fairly consistent, but you can see it's slightly higher for people who are in the community, that they have their rights are respected more often in terms of the domains around people entering their home without permission, their bedroom without permission, can be alone with visitors. So people who are working in the community have a slightly greater level of rights and respect. So we see this data, and it tells us we know that people want to work. The data also tells us that people who are working have a higher quality of life, greater community access and participation, greater choice in life and in services. Other data says they feel safer and more secure. They make more money. So there's a lot of benefits to people working in the community, and we know people want to work. However, the data also tells us that the majority of people are not working, and unfortunately work is not even included in their individual service plans. So that's a basic overview of where we are nationally and where Arizona fits into that national picture. And then the next thing we want to talk about is what policy considerations are needed to increase the level of integrated employment. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Janine.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, so on the hinges of what policy considerations need to be decided and implemented, there are a lot of forces pushing and continuing to push the employment agenda forward. So I'm going to start my portion of this presentation with you today talking about the Olmstead decision. And I'm really going to talk about how it relates to a state's compliance of Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, because it's clearly a national mandate to end the segregation of people with disabilities in all aspects of everyday life. And I really want you to think about that piece on all aspects of everyday life, because it's a very important point, and I think it's something that you will almost instantaneously connect to when we discuss the CMS community regulations later in the presentation. I don't want you to get me wrong. I know that they've made significant improvements in their Olmstead planning, in closing institutions and having people have the choice to move into the community. But you will see that that's just the beginning stages of really full Olmstead implementation. So the legal basis for Olmstead, which I said, is the Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. You all know that it prohibits discrimination by public entities, and it's discrimination in all services, programs, and activities. So what that means is that all of the services, programs, and activities have to be provided in the most integrated setting. So what is the most integrated setting? Well, according to Olmstead, that is, it's a setting that enables individuals with disabilities to interact with their non-disabled persons to the fullest extent possible. So this is the second piece that I want to emphasize, that integration mandate, particularly how it parallels again to the CMS regulations that we're going to talk about. So the Olmstead case really reinforced that unjustified segregation is, in fact, discrimination. I don't think any of us could refute that point. And it supports one of the most fundamental rights of Americans with disabilities, and that's the choice to live independently. But what we need to focus on is that it extends to more than just where you live. It extends to how you spend your time and what your day activities look like. There has to be in those options things such as quality community services, affordable housing and opportunities, integrated day activities. I'm sure you're all hearing about Rhode Island as it pertains to integrated day activities, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail with that. But in the Olmstead case, I really want to enforce that they went as far as to say that a person's social contacts, for example, work options, and economic independence are among some of the everyday life activities. So we have to be reminded of these things. Work options, economic independence. That makes us pause and really think about what's going on in Rhode Island right now, doesn't it? So some important points to note about the Olmstead decision. If you really think long and hard about the intent of Olmstead, you realize pretty quickly that it's not just about moving people out of the institutional setting, and I covered that. It's bigger than that. We have to move beyond where a person lives and wrap our arms around thinking about their experiences. It supports people having a full life and opportunities, where they want to live, how they want to spend their day. And Allison supported those types of things with the data that she showed us on the outcomes for people who do have these in their life. It's a life like you and I have that leaves a lot more work ahead of us to truly meet the integration mandate of the Olmstead decision. So I talked a little bit about, I mentioned Rhode Island. I know you've all been hearing a lot about the Department of Justice and their involvement in some of the states that our colleagues are from across the country. I mean, the Olmstead Enforcement, is a #1 priority for the Department of Justice. You know that President Obama mentioned in the Year of Community Living, he not only mentioned it, I want to say that he instructed that department to push the enforcement of the Olmstead decision. And they are doing that. So I know if you were all like the rest of us, we were really watching and reading everything we can get our hands on regarding DOJ's involvement with Rhode Island. We all have probably been looking at that for many, many reasons, but the integrated day piece always rises to the top when we're talking about the Rhode Island settlement. It is a major settlement that sets a big precedent, and it should all make us pause because it's a state's obligation to fulfill the integration mandate. And Rhode Island had an unmistakable over-reliance on sheltered workshops. They didn't fulfill the integration mandate. It is the nation's first statewide settlement to address the rights of people with disabilities to receive employment and daytime services in the community, rather than in sheltered workshops and facility-based day programs. This settlement started in January of last year, and it took a little over a year, but a final agreement was signed on April 11th. We provided you with the link on the slide for your reference at a later time. I would encourage you to really read through that settlement agreement. They did a very labor-intensive investigation and interviewed a lot of different people in Rhode Island. Okay, so I know that the settlement agreement is somewhat lengthy, so we thought it would be pressing for us to really highlight some of the most important points of that agreement. The first thing I want to talk about is that when we talk about supported employment in the agreement, that it's supported employment and it pays at least minimum wage. There are a maximum number of hours, but they're consistent with the person's abilities and preferences. And it has to be an average of at least 20 hours per week. So they're not saying everyone has to work a 40-hour work week. There's specific parameters here, and it's based on a person's abilities and preferences. So part and parcel to talking about supported employment services you can't not talk about wraparound supports. What do people do when they're not working? Well, they talk about things like mainstream educational opportunities, leisure activities that the person is really, really interested in, and volunteer activities, same things that we all do, right? And there was a really big concern about youth in transition and post-secondary activities too late in the game. So transition is going to start at age 14, and it's going to include internships, job site visits, all of those things that you should be doing in school to find out what your chosen career path is going to be. Continuing on, there's about 2,000 people in the settlement agreement that are in sheltered workshops right now, and 1,250 students. So Rhode Island is roughly looking at about 3,200 people who are in the protected class. This is going to take, obviously, we all know, a significant, I have to move my slide, thank you for that, a significant amount of funding over a 10-year period. And those funds will, in essence, be redirected from segregated settings to those that really incentivize services in integrated settings. And they're just starting to work up their implementation plan of how that's going to be done. So we're all going to be, I know the SCLN will be working very closely with Rhode Island through this process, and we will keep everybody apprised as time marches on. So the agreement significantly advances, once again, we talked about the department's work to enforce the Supreme Court's decision in Olmstead. Everything in the most integrated setting appropriate. I can't stress that enough. My screen is, I lost connection for a second, but as soon as it comes back up, or if one of my team members would just push the slide forward for me, I'd appreciate it. So Rhode Island is not the only state that's under the radar right now. There have been other states that DOJ has been in enforcing the segregated day issues. The U.S. versus Oregon, over-reliance on sheltered workshops. Again, DOJ found things that were similar in Rhode Island. Segregation in shelter work, there's people in shelter work that want to work. Where is the expansion on supported employment? The state increased opportunities for supported employment and also increased the state's pool of supported employment providers and at-risk students. So Rhode Island and Oregon, if you look at those pieces, they had really similar findings. Two common themes, two common denominators are the over-reliance on sheltered work and the lack of preparation for students to work in integrated community settings. Also, similar settlements in Virginia, Delaware, North Carolina, and Georgia, expanding supported employment and integrated day activities. So we talked about the Department of Justice. So what is besides Olmstead and ADA as being two forces that are really pushing employment forward, and then DOJ, how does CMS fit into all of this emphasis on the integration mandate? What kind of guidance have they distributed related to employment and supporting people in the most integrated setting? So we first got a glimpse of CMS's push for employment in the September 19th 11 guidance that they put out. The SCLN, I want to give kudos to my colleagues for being major contributors of that guidance. And it really highlights the importance of competitive work in a nutshell for people in the waiver programs. So in that bulletin, some of the ways that CMS was promoting in integrated employment was that they separated supported employment into individual and group services. States can offer both. But separating them out provides an opportunity really for the state to be able to track what they are spending the bulk of their supported employment funds on. And what I mean by that is, are you spending most of your money in group supported employment? And if you are, you want to really take a look at that, because there would need to be a shift into more individual integrated options as well. So it lets you see where the balance is and what you're really spending the bulk of those dollars on. A new was added, career planning. Should be a time-limited service with the focus really on documenting the person's career objectives and really their needs in the supported employment front. Emphasize person-centered planning. I know that you've all been doing that for a very long time. I've been doing it for 15 years. It's been around for probably, I'd say, 30. This is nothing new. But CMS, which when we talk about the home and setting regulations, home and community-based setting regulations, you'll see that they took a more detailed approach to person-centered planning. So the other thing is that ticket-to-work payments for outcomes are not in conflict with Medicaid rules. And really that is, in essence, you're not double dipping. You're not incentivizing MA services for payments on the delivery of a service. What you're doing is you're paying for a desired employment outcome. So it's an outcome payment. Also, clarifications that volunteer work and other activities are not supported employment. So you shouldn't be doing volunteer work if you're receiving the supported employment service in that arena. And it supports peer support and self-determination as best practices in the field. Absolutely. Making your own decisions and leaning on your peers for support. Pretty everyday life stuff, right? And CMS is definitely touting that as a best practice, just like it is for any of us. Pre-vocational services, CMS, it's not an endpoint. It should be time limited, and states are starting to take active steps to either limit that service, not fund it. They're all taking different approaches for the purpose of helping someone obtain competitive employment. CMS has not taken a firm stance on what they would consider a time limit, but emphasizes that that service is a stepping stone. It is not an endpoint by no means. Coworker support, self-directed, which we talked about, hiring family members and friends to be job coaches, peer supports, models of support really to deliver on the job support, as these are, they feel, and we definitely feel, are effective delivery methods, and they're really, really less intrusive, that peer support, into the flow of a business. And customized employment, individualizing the employment relationship that exists between employees and employers in ways that meet both of their needs. So the big one, the Medicaid home and community-based services regulations. This is a really big deal. It's really probably as big as when CMS put out their technical guidance and we all sat there and thought, oh, geez, we had to pause. This is really what they want us, how they want us to run and deliver the waiver program. We have a lot of work to do. Yeah. It's the same kind of feeling that came about when these regs came out. They're huge, the regs. They're like 400 pages, and probably at least 80 pages of these are the actual regs. I would really recommend, though, reading the comment section of these regulations, because you all know that CMS did not put out the guidance yet for non-residential services, but if you read these comments closely, it gives you a glimpse of what CMS is thinking and where they might be going. So I do want to acknowledge that we added the site to the bottom of the slide, but I do want you to make note that it cut off for some reason after the H, the CBS. So it's www.medicaid.gov/HCBS. So I'm not going to cover every aspect of these regulations because that would take us at least 2 hours. And we don't have the guidance yet, so we don't want to get ahead of the guidance. But we want to run through some of the main points for you. So the intent of the regulations is to ensure that individuals receiving long-term services and supports under a 1915C, which is your home and community-based waiver, the I, which is a state plan option, and the K, which is another state plan option but really focuses on personal care and in-home supports, all three of those options that people who are being supported have to have full access to the benefits of community living and opportunities to receive services in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. That again, that piece again. And also to enhance the quality of home and community-based services and provide added protections. These protections are now in regulation, so they carry a lot of teeth. The final rule establishes settings that are not home and community-based. These are your nursing facilities, for instance, your hospitals, your ICFs. You can still provide respite in those settings, but they're not going to be considered home and community-based settings. And this is a no ifs, ands, or buts piece of these regulations, okay? And they also give you some settings that they say, these are presumed not to be home and community-based. Interesting. We don't think it's home and community-based, but, let us tell you that they can't be an inpatient facility, they can't be adjacent to a public institution, and they can't isolate individuals from the broader community. So if you pass the test on number 1 of the settings that are a double if ands, no buts about it, not home and community-based, you go to step 2, and you look at those pieces that make a setting presumed not to be and see if it meets those. They give you a little bit of flexibility. There is a discretion for the secretary to make a determination, okay? So if you think in a state that you have a case that a setting that's presumed not to be home and community-based you feel really is home and community-based, you can make that plea to the secretary. I also mentioned person-centered planning and that we've been doing that for a very long time. But what I do want to just say about this is that person-centered planning in these regulations is now codified in regulation. And I have to say that CMS has gotten very prescriptive on content, but not on a specific format. So there are some content pieces of person-centered planning that they want to make sure that are addressed. And conflict-free case management, that was in the guidance now for a long time, but once again, it's now codified in rule. So CMS can definitely push the issue with states that have conflicted case management. Okay, application of setting requirements to the non-residential settings. What I just want to briefly say about this is we're waiting on the guidance. It applies to all settings where home and community-based services are delivered. I already said not just residential. They have to be integrated in and support access to the community. They have to be able to provide people with the opportunity to seek employment again, work in competitive integrated settings, engage in community life. And this is the most interesting point, I think, to this. People have to have access to the same degree that individuals not receiving home and community-based services do. So what does a person's day look like? Is it typical to you and I? This is what I mean about those experience pieces of these regulations, that you really have to dive deep into what experiences is that person having throughout the day. because that's going to be like super important, really super important. So as we talk about those experiences, remember that Olmstead DOJ mandate that to end segregation in all aspects of community life. They're both talking, and this is the alignment of that Olmstead mandate and the CMS rules. Okay, that's something that we really have to acknowledge here. That aligns them. The regulations truly, as you can see, complement the Integration Mandate and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And in the comments section, remember I said read those comments. Here's a little nugget that was in there. Within the future guidance, CMS says, we will reinforce the importance of complying with other federal requirements, such as the ADA and Olmstead. So, you know, when that guidance comes out, they already gave us a glimpse that they're going to reinforce what we already discussed in this webinar about the ADA and Olmstead. You know, AKA Rhode Island. There we go. You know, just, you know, we need to make the connections. So we covered a lot of information, and in the essence of time, I'm going to try to move as pretty quickly through these last couple of slides I have. So as you think about all of the information that we covered today, what does it mean for all of you stakeholders in the process in Arizona? What does it mean for the most important people in this equation, individuals and families? Well, it means that we are all partners in ensuring the intent of the ADA, which is to reduce barriers to people with disabilities. That's everyone's goal. That has to be in the center of our minds all the time as we are working daily to support individuals with disabilities. You have to be you don't have to be reminded, but the people around us, when you're doing your planning meetings, make sure person-centered planning is occurring. Make sure you're all talking about what's important to that person, their personal preferences, and meeting their desired outcomes, because that will get you to those experiential pieces that CMS is looking for. Where a person chooses to live is integrated in and supports full access to the greater community. That doesn't mean that everybody has to get their own homes or live in their own apartments or, you know, live with their families. All of those things are viable options, as well as if they choose to live in a home with other people with disabilities. Doesn't matter where they live, they have to have full access to that greater community. People have to have the opportunity to seek employment and work in competitive settings and engage in community life, control resources, receive services. These are all the basic sentiments that all of us have. There are rights, and people with disabilities have to have the same degree of access to those rights. What does it mean for states? Increased enforcement of ADA and Olmstead. You want to be ahead of DOJ or anybody else. So when we went over the CMS regulations, I always feel that CMS gives us a guide, but still allows the state to come up with a plan and implement it based on the state's needs. DOJ, not the same sentiment. If they come into your state, like they did in Rhode Island, they're going to set the parameters and they're going to tell you what you need to do. So this is why it's critical to really, you know, have this in our minds and really start planning, okay? Attention to the new guidance, further emphasizing the most integrated setting, okay? They're really putting their, you know, money where their regulations and their guidance is, you know, and complying with the ADA. So we have to be aware of that. Employment is always the valued outcome. It may not be easy to build an efficient, effective system that supports the desired employment outcome, but Arizona works with the SELN. You're already thinking about these types of things by having this webinar today to listen to educate yourself and to strategize, and then engage stakeholders and emphasize youth and young adults. Providers, continued realignment of your business practices to meet this demand of more integrated services. Investment in those staff competencies. You have to really build the competencies of your employment staff, because it's not easy work. It really isn't. They really need to know how to do outreach and how to really be strong, supported employment providers. And you got to rethink, what is the outcome of the service delivery? The outcome is we want people to move into integrated community employment. And to do that, you have to build stronger business relationships with the community at large. It's definitely something that we need to engage in to really make integrated employment a success. So there are many states going down the path of looking at sheltered workshops, but I just wanted to really quickly highlight the blueprint in Massachusetts. We gave you the link there. They announced this blueprint in November. They've worked on it for a really, really long time. They are closing the front door to sheltered workshops by January 1st, 14, with no new referrals, closing all of those by June 30th, transitioning participants to community-based day, people making minimum wage or higher, and phasing out group-supported employment. Really hefty, yes. I'm sure we will learn a lot about them because they are also part of the SELN, and we will work with them through this. And there's a lot of states interested in this blueprint because they've made a huge, huge investment into it. So, and then this slide is the ending to my presentation. It is Robin Cooper's slide from our NASD staff, and I loved it because she says, this is an opportunity for all, and it really, really is. This gives us a lot to think about, all the information that we covered today. Coupled with a lot to think about, oh yeah, a really lot to do. So I want to acknowledge both of those points. But there's an incredible, incredible opportunity to bring supports and services closer to not only what we aspire for people, but that's inherent in what we do, but really closer to our values and our vision statement. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Allison and Janine. It's an enormous amount of information, and I suspect a lot of the folks who are on the webinar today were aware of parts of it. Some may be aware of all of it, but it certainly gives us pause, and it was the reason, a lot of that is the reason for today's webinar. So let me talk just a little bit. I'll start with kind of a definition and what we're looking at as employment first, and then talk a little bit about what we call the bricks and mortar to what we currently have in place that we think will help us and will really will become the foundation for our movement forward. As concisely as possible, what is Employment First? It's really a state's commitment to focus its efforts on promoting integrated and competitive employment as the first choice and the preferred outcome for people with disabilities of working age. Please note that I did not say employment only. Other supports and services will clearly remain available, but what we are saying is that employment will be the first opportunity and the first option we will encourage if you are of working age. The very first thing you'll see on your slide is that Employment First encompasses a national initiative of 26 states. We hope that Arizona will soon be in that queue. We may be 27, we may be 28, because there are a lot of states who are currently working on their own initiatives. Some have developed an Employment First policy through executive policy creation. Some have done it via administrative directives, and some have done it through legislation. We're engaging in a strategic planning process that will hopefully guide Arizona into what direction we go in as far as establishing an employment first policy or an employment first state. Second of all, employment first is all about promoting integrated employment for all people with disabilities. While most states, especially the DD offices, have included employment supports and services within their array of home and community-based services, the emphasis on integrated or competitive employment has varied. We had a national high back in 2001 of just about 25% of folks with developmental disabilities working in integrated employment. Unfortunately, that number has decreased. This was in some of the data that Allison shared with you, so it will be on the slides that you have. That's decreased to about 19.3% in 2011. Mark is going to talk a little bit later more specifically about Arizona's numbers. But employment first efforts are all about increasing these percentages as much as possible. And it probably would be helpful if I defined integrated employment so we're all kind of on the same page. We define integrated employment as working in a setting in which the individual interacts with non-disabled people to the same extent anyone in that position interacts with others. That does not count the paid support staff that are working with individuals on the job are not included in that parameter. Competitive employment, the definition of competitive employment, kind of takes it one step further by stipulating that it's employment in a competitive setting, so that's in the community, at prevailing wages, with benefits the same as anyone else doing that same job. That could also include self-employment. The third point, or the third element of employment first, is that it guides policy and practice. True employment first initiatives include the creation of guiding principles and practices that align funding and the services that are available through that funding to the support of individuals in integrated and or competitive work settings. And last but certainly not least, employment first, as I said earlier, is all about promoting full community integration. Michael is going to talk a little bit later about our strategic planning process. And that really is what we hope will help Arizona determine how it's going to develop its employment first efforts in our state. I worked for a gentleman years ago in talking about community integration who always said, and I'll paraphrase him, but he said, a person with a disability essentially wants pretty much the same things everybody else does. They want a safe place to live, they want the money to buy the things they need and want, and they want a date on Saturday night. Well, it takes an income to afford all three of those life desires. And I'm really not too sure we're all about helping them with that third event, but a job definitely helps with the first two. Being employed in a community setting helps individuals with disabilities become contributors, to meet new people, to increase their social circles, and maybe they can get that date after all, and especially feel a greater sense of self-worth. Who today on this call, or just look around, who doesn't like to hear great job? Who doesn't like getting that paycheck or seeing that deposit made in their checking account? That's really all about community engagement, community participation. So what does Arizona have going for it today as we undertake our journey? These are the building blocks, or the foundational pieces that I mentioned earlier. They're not in any particular order. I should have alphabetized them, but start with the Arizona Employment and Disability Partnership. This grew out of an effort about 4 years ago or so to write a systems change grant that was a national systems change grant that incorporated employment outcomes as a key priority. That fledgling group has continued to meet and has become the Arizona Employment and Disability Partnership. And our purpose is to identify and address the barriers across service systems and ensure that the labor pool of individuals with disability is integrated into the state workforce development planning. We also have Project Search. If you were hearing what Janine was saying in the Rhode Island settlement, one of the things that they're encouraging is that efforts begin for employment and career planning or higher education as early as age 14, and that might include internships or mentoring, job shadowing. Project Search is a national project that's growing in Arizona. It actually began in 1996 at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital as an attempt to help them stem their growing turnover rate with many of their entry-level positions. It has become a training model for over 150 national employers in 40 states and in 4 countries. It serves both students and adults and essentially provides the training to help them gain actual specific marketable skills for competitive employment. We currently have Project Search initiatives in southern Arizona in the Tucson area and several in the Maricopa area, both central, east, and west. And with any luck, those will continue to grow. The third is Arizona Disability Benefits 101, or what we fondly call AZDB 101. And hopefully you've already heard about this initiative, are familiar with it, but if not, you really need to be. There's no one who's participating in today's webinar who shouldn't know just enough to be dangerous about this resource, if not know it intimately. It's probably one of the most user-friendly online resources you will ever find. It provides real-life information on the impact of wages on both state and federal cash and health care benefits. It also allows an individual or their families or both to walk through very specific personal scenarios to see how their federal and state benefits could be impacted by going to work or even by changing their work situation. It also provides concrete information on where to find help to get a job. What do you do once you get a job? What are the reporting requirements? You know, who needs to know what and how often and what format? There's information about housing. There's information about transportation. There is if you go to one section on the website, there is an 8-page index of topics that there's information about in this resource. And the most recent addition was information relative to the Affordable Care Act. The best thing is, most of the information is Arizona specific, so you will see information very specific for Arizona residents, and it's all in non-government speak. So you can really understand it and work through it. It truly is a user-friendly resource. The fourth building block that we have is Untapped Arizona. This is one of the newest kids on the block. It is and will be a one-stop resource for business to help Arizona employers connect with qualified job applicants with disabilities. It's still somewhat under construction, but it will and is anticipated to become a business leadership network governed by a not-for-profit board of directors composed of Arizona business leaders, a truly key group of folks that we need to engage as we move forward with Employment First. The fifth resource on our list is what we finally call ASCOPT, or the Arizona Community of Practice on Transition. This is a collaborative of state agencies and other stakeholders, all committed to enhancing the transition of young adults from school to adult life, whether that's higher education or a job, eventually leading to a job. There is a statewide leadership group that has met since 2002, was reorganized in 2009, and since has not only continued to build its repertoire of resources and trainings from the statewide perspective, but we've also been able to support the development of several local communities of practice on transition. The emphasis from the statewide group as well as the local groups is identifying barriers and, more importantly, identifying cross-system resolutions to those barriers. The sixth is, as you probably are more than aware of, and phenomenal resources, the State Employment Leadership Network. You heard from two representatives of the SELN this morning. And what the SELN is a joint initiative between the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass and, pardon me for the mouthful again, the National Association of State Developmental Disabilities Directors Association. Essentially, it's also a community of practice. It's a community of practice of state DD agencies, all of whom are committed to improving integrated and competitive employment outcomes for the people they serve. Arizona became a member in 2012 under the good graces and the financial support of our Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. And we benefit from not only the expertise of the researchers and the staff at ICI and NASDs, but also from the sharing of other states, whether it's promising practice. For me, that means things that are working well. We also talk to each other about lessons learned, and some things that didn't go so well, and how we might be able to avoid some of that. There are 26 states currently walking the walk that we're embarking on, and it's again an awesome way to share and learn. Another foundation or building block is the Arizona Aspire grant. And Aspire meaning achieving success by promoting readiness for education and employment. This is called the Promise Grant from the national perspective, and we're just in the midst of getting this rolled out in Arizona as part of a multi-state consortium. But it's intended to engage youth ages 14 to 16 and their families who are receiving SSI to help them navigate what to be the very complicated systems of public benefits, help them in accessing community services, other state system services, supports, and information to move them toward greater self-sufficiency. The intended outcome is really encouraging move from poverty. And FSI, if that is your only income, is poverty. That plain and simple is poverty level income. And again, the intended goal of the Aspire grant is to move youth from poverty to help them become more financially successful. And one way to do that is to help them identify career choices and becoming employed. The eighth building block that we are looking at is the division's expanded service array. As many states, we have a pretty full array of employment services and supports available to eligible division members, but soon, very soon, and I don't have a crystal ball, so I've been saying soon for quite a while, but we hope to have a new service called Transition to Employment available for our members. That new service is intended to provide training in the soft skills that everyone needs to both get and keep a job, whether that's resume writing, what do I do with a paycheck, how do I start a bank account, if I have a question at work, how do I ask for help, how do I manage a bad day, What do you mean I have to shower every day? What do you mean I need to wear my uniform? It's those issues that tend to lose people their jobs. This is a program that we hope to have available to students beginning as early as potentially age 14 or 16 at least, available after school, available during the summer. So again, help them build the skills for a more successful transition to employment after graduation. It's also potentially available to adults who are currently in day services who may have a very limited work history or maybe no work history. But the intended outcome of this service is integrated employment. Our 9th building block, and this is the Work Incentive Information Network, is really the head and the hands of the DB 101, plus a bunch of other value-added stuff. But the WIN staff provide training and TA on the use of DB 101. If you're interested in becoming a trainer so that you can train staff and others, or you work with your families, work with your students, whatever that may be, they will, and have some dynamite train the trainer courses. They also develop and share best practice information to support employment, and they are collecting outcome data to track employment outcomes, to track customer satisfaction, and also attitudinal change around the employment of folks with disabilities. And last, and by no means least, we have the support of the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, who are promoting employment outcomes for the constituency they're charged to represent. They have not only funded the division's membership in the SELN, they have issued small grants to individuals with disabilities to help them start their own businesses. The Planning Council's state plan emphasizes initiatives designed to create integrated and competitive employment for Arizonans with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And it was with their support, given the foundation and the building blocks that I just discussed, and pretty much feeling a whole lot of angst from the kinds of information that Janine shared relative to the national movement towards integrated resources and integrated services. There was a group of us that recognized it was about time Arizona began its Employment First strategic planning process. So with the DD Planning Council's support, we convened I was going to say a small work group, but it really wasn't. It was actually a very large group of stakeholders to begin the discussion. We had our first meeting in October of last year, and you can see the long list of stakeholders who have been involved, including advocacy organization reps, colleges and universities, including community colleges, the county workforce investment programs were represented. We have educators from both private and community school districts. We have family members. We have our Parent Training and Information Center representative, that is here in Arizona, is Raising Special Kids. We have our Protection and Advocacy Agency represented, several service providers, tribal representatives, representatives from both of our University Centers for Excellence. We have IHD with NAU, and they are helping us today as the hosts for this webinar, as well as the Sonoran UCID at the University of Arizona. We have a whole host of state agencies involved, including the Planning Council. We have our Healthcare Cost Containment program or access. We have the Department of Ed, Exceptional Student Services, transition specialists involved. We have Department of Health, Behavioral Health Services at the table. DDD is at the table, as well as the Rehab Services Administration or Vocational Rehabilitation Program. Since that meeting in October of this huge group, we have had a smaller core group meeting to plan for our strategic planning. That's kind of like plan to plan, I know. But that's where we are headed, and Mike Lave is going to talk a little bit about this, more specifically about the strategic planning process. But with all of that energy and all of that expertise around the table, what do we hope to accomplish? First, we want to gather input, and we want to gather input from as broad a stakeholder group as we can. And I'm setting Mike up because that's another thing that he'll be chatting about later during our presentation. We want to partner with our stakeholders. That's essentially every one of you listening today, and for those of you who aren't listening today and maybe listening to this later on, you're included as a stakeholder. With this information, with the input, we want to develop a strategic plan. That strategic plan is intended to identify how, who, where, what, but it's really intended to help us create opportunities for integrated employment for our Arizonans with disabilities. We want to promote culture change and empowerment for the individuals for whom we work. We want to foster engagement, and we want to establish expectations about work. We want to encourage and engage families and educators to start asking students, what do you want to be when you grow up? Sooner than later. I think we start to ask that question of our kids without disabilities very early on, first grade, kindergarten. But we tend not to do that with our folks with disabilities. So we want to encourage everyone to begin to ask that question as soon as possible. We want to encourage our students with disabilities to think about summer jobs, to start exploring their strengths and their interests, just as many of us did. Some of you have been in training sessions I've done, and you've heard me say, you know, most of us worked summer jobs, and it probably helped us not identify what we wanted to be when we grew up, but what we didn't want to be when we grew up. But at least we had that experience, we had that opportunity, and we more and more want our young adults with disabilities to have that same experience. Overall, we want to move the percentage of Arizonans with developmental or intellectual disabilities who are employed from 20-some% to a much higher percent. Even though, as Allison pointed out, Arizona may be just somewhat ahead of the curve in the percentage of folks who are working versus not working, it's still a tiny percentage. And we do mirror the national percentages where our non-integrated day program is growing at a higher rate than our integrated employment. So we have been holding steady. The good news is we're holding steady at a slightly higher rate, but the fact is we aren't growing like we should be. There is no way we can hope to accomplish any of these outcomes without the commitment of a great many people. And you're going to hear from 3 of them. That's only 3 of a whole larger number. But there are 3 critical stakeholders that you'll hear from. Let me first introduce Melissa Van Hook. Melissa is going to talk about why Employment First is important to her as a family member. Melissa?
Hello. Can you hear me okay, Linda?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I am the mother of 2 boys with autism. My eldest is 17 and is a junior in high school and will be entering his senior year next year. I'm also the co-founder and facilitator for a group in the East Valley in Arizona called EVAN, East Valley Autism Network, and we support approximately 500 families affected by autism. Like many of the families that are supported by EVAN, my own family is preparing for our son's transition out of high school, and it is my desire as a parent to see both of my sons, but obviously my focus is on my big one right now, Kyle, to be successful. I want him to be able to go into a job of his choosing and be fully integrated into the community. I know that if he's integrated in employment, if he's around other typical people, if he's in a job that isn't in a sheltered workshop, his chances of having increased quality of life is huge. He will live in the community, he'll participate in the community, and the statistics and studies have shown that. And like any other parent out there, with or without a child with a disability, I want my child to be happy and live the most fulfilling life possible. And I know that work and employment are key for that. I think one of the scariest things as a parent of a child with autism in discussing independence and adulthood are the unemployment statistics. While they're high in the disability community, they're exceptionally high in the autism community. Some estimates are as high as 90%. I don't know that that is true. I guess it depends on where you live, but that's kind of frightening as a parent. I recognize that as a parent, I have to do my part to get my child to independence. As Linda mentioned earlier, parents have to begin early on asking their kids whether or not they have a disability, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's a critical question. I think too often, as a parent of a child with disabilities, we focus so much on therapies and living in the day and in the moment that we don't think of the long-term outcome always. We don't think about them someday either living independently or semi-independently. And it's my hope that the Employment First initiative will advance that ability to be independent. You know, I got to be perfectly honest, too. Families play a big part in planning for post-secondary, and I think far too often they rely on the school districts to do their part and assume that the transition process is going to happen during an IEP meeting, and steps will be taken to help their child get employment or seek post-secondary training. And although we have got excellent training from our transition specialists at Department of Education, and they're available to all of our school districts, not all of our districts do a great job, or even within a school district, not every school does a terrific job with transition. I'm kind of shocked that with my own son, my oldest son, the issue of transition has hardly been addressed. And within the same district, we have other families that they're talking about getting their driver's license and being independent. There's some assistance with that. And so I'm hoping as a parent to both of these boys that there will be some awareness with Employment First, and that there will really, I know that part of this push is to get the educational systems involved. And I'm hoping that the parents, the school districts, employers, all the supports that are available out there, that we can almost have a wraparound with the state services that are available and employers that would like to work with our families and will be available to embrace these kids, because we've got an avalanche of kids that are looking at sitting home, playing video games, and not doing anything. And it's my hope that with Employment First, there will truly be a partnership between the school districts, the parents, the agencies, that everybody is working together to help these kids have independent lives. So I got to say, I'm grateful for this as a parent, and I see that we've got an opportunity to really increase the employment and the happiness of all these families, because I'm getting hit right now as one of the leaders of East Valley Autism Network with parents that are coming through saying my child's graduating next year and I have no idea what they're going to do. And it's just more kind of evidence to me that we have to have a national incentive. So I'm so grateful. I think this can have a terrific impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and you're hired.
Thank you.
I'd like to also introduce Margaret Corcoran-Smith, who is also a family member, and we've asked to talk a little bit from her perspective as to why integrated and competitive employment should be part of a young adult's life. Margaret?
Hello. I'm so excited to hear what's going on. This is just so eye-opening. And as a parent of an 18-year-old young man with Down syndrome, I'm really encouraged that this timely movement of Employment First will help refocus opportunities and give us parents hope and engage the business community to expand the current thinking, provide more transformational programs for us. You know, as parents of children without disabilities, we have many goals and dreams, and we assume that they're going to grow up and be successful and self-sufficient. With our special needs kids, so we have goals and dreams, but they're tempered by that uncertainty of what can they achieve. And then it's further complicated by what's available and is there really appropriate employment. So this Employment First gives us that hope that there will be real jobs in the community. And I think utilizing this collective energy of what's going on nationally, state policy, state agencies, districts, advocacy groups, will create that synergy that's needed for success and give us hope, real hope, which will grow as the success is achieved. I was kind of thinking about it in terms of the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And in the case of special needs students, it's the village, the school district, the state agencies, the advocacy groups, the service providers. And we have this process of the ISPs with quarterly reports, therapy sessions, complex medical issues, and then the individual education plans. So many of these activities leave us parents feeling very overwhelmed, overloaded with so many duties and responsibilities that oftentimes we don't really focus or consider the future. We're dealing with our immediate concerns that our kids can learn to the best of their ability. And I think in many ways, if we could sort of back it up in the IEP process to at a much younger age, we start talking to kids about careers. We ask them, what are they interested in? We provide them with opportunities to learn and to experience. Because even in middle school, when it's mentioned, it still is way out on the horizon. And when there's no real employment opportunities, well, it's aspirational. Sometimes it can feel a little futile asking these questions. In some ways, I think we should kind of view our children and adults as a little less special, a little more typical, in that they need more career information. They need to participate in the discussions and career planning. And I think Employment First would really help sort of refocus this whole process so that our students, our adults, and the families would really think about this. What skills do they need? What do they want to do? How can we give them experiences, inspire them to really dream and try and get jobs out in the community? I also think that the key player to this whole thing is local business. We really need to reach out. We got to bring them to the table. And, you know, it sounds like a lot of good things are being done, but from my point of view, in my little local area, I don't see as much. In fact, so much so that I actually went and talked to an individual I know who owns a number of McDonald's restaurants and kind of talked to her about how individuals with developmental disabilities can be great employees. You know, they can bring opportunities to employers where they can make money, save money, or solve problems by benefiting from good work habits, pride in the job, arriving on time, leaving on time, showing up. In fact, I so much so had a concern that I actually went and trained at McDonald's restaurants to try and learn what the job is like so that I could see it as a parent from an employer's perspective and from the perspective of the individual who could do this job. And I think, consistent with what Melissa was saying, as parents, we have responsibilities, but we need the help of the greater village. So I think the operating presumption of employment first, that all individuals with developmental disabilities are employable, but there's also that recognition that one size doesn't fit all, and there's variable skills and programs. So, as a parent of a student who's currently in the transition process, my son is a junior at Desert Mountain High School, and I'm having some issues going through this process, trying to get information, trying to see, what his skills are, what he can do. But I think as this momentum builds and as there's real opportunities in the community, those of us who are currently in the transition process will be encouraged by it and buy into it. And I think as this program is expanding, the younger students and parents will follow, and ultimately the individuals out in the community will be given the opportunities that they need. I like that the Employment First is such a great opportunity to build that strong bond between businesses, communities, and agencies. But I think another important thing is developing an integrated, seamless process where possibly the school districts, I think, in some ways, should almost be in charge of this, where they can really identify and help refer individuals and families for services, so that this could ultimately be incorporated into a life plan for individuals with disabilities, so that ultimately they'll get jobs in the community, and it'll give them that great sense of purpose and pride that we all get through community involvement and working in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Margaret, and you are a part of our core group, and we are so glad that you are. And families, as you heard from both Melissa and Margaret, are absolutely critical elements as we are going down this path of employment first. And they will remain critical elements because of the influence they have not only on their family member, but on all of us who work with them and their family members. So we appreciate both of you, and we appreciate your input today. The next gentleman who is presenting is Mark Jacoby, who is the Executive Director of Gompers Habilitation Center. And Mark is representing, he's got a huge burden ahead of him. He is representing the perspective of our employment providers, another entity without whom we can't do this work, pardon the pun. He is also a member of our core team, and I'm just going to be quiet and let Mark take over.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Appreciate that. When I was sitting down to prepare my comments this afternoon, I started out and I wrote this really wonderfully long, flowery, motivating speech full of big thoughts and big words, and it just went on and on and on, and I'm not going to put you all through that. I've narrowed it down to just about 45 minutes worth of comments. I'm joking, I promise.
I have my hands around it.
Yes, I promise. But what I realized when I was looking at this, because the question is, why is employment first important to providers, is that I was really overcomplicating it. And when I thought about it, and I wanted to break this down as simply as I could, it seemed to me that this whole employment first thing is important to providers because it boils down to two thoughts. The first is that we can do this because we have to. And the second thought is we can do it because we want to, and we all know it's the right thing to do. And when I start taking a look at those, and it may be a kind of a subtle between we have to and we want to, two very divergent thoughts come out when you start looking at those two options. When you look at the option of we can do it because we have to, it seems to me that that starts to leave it in the hands of advocacy groups, lawyers, people like the Department of Justice, and God help us all, worst of all, politicians, how this thing needs to be done and how it's going to happen. That thought terrifies me. As opposed to we can do it because we want to and we know it's the right thing to do, which to me changes the entire tenor and the entire tone of the conversation, because now what it does is it opens up to heartfelt, honest, and let's not kid ourselves, very difficult discussions, but it also opens opportunity for partnerships, collaborations, and a coming together. You know, I was sitting down with Dr. Larry Latham, the assistant director for DDD, literally maybe a couple of hours after the DOJ ruling in Rhode Island came out, and he said something to me that I think really kind of succinctly wraps that up, which is that we can either get out ahead of this together, or we can get run over by it together. And I don't know about you guys, but I would much prefer to get out ahead of it together, because the bottom line is, when I'm looking at all the folks that are around this table, and when I'm looking at all the folks, I can see most of the list of people that are on the phone, the webinar today. Let's be honest, we're going to have disagreements on the path to employment first. But I think that every single one of us, whether we're providers, whether we're the state, we're parents, we're advocates, and most importantly, those we serve, all believe in the destination, which we've talked about here today over and over, which is the destination being integrated employment opportunities for all individuals with disabilities at a living wage. Nobody's arguing against that. We have different approaches to get there, but everybody's agreeing on that as our end game. So we've heard a lot about statistics and things like that, and so I'm not going to bear down on those a tremendous amount, but sometimes hearing percentages are helpful, but to hear actual numbers kind of really put a concrete form to those. So I just wanted to mention that, you know, as of January 1st, 2014, there were 7,400 people funded by DDD in day program services, 7,400. Approximately 5,000 of those individuals were in day programs, DTA programs. 2,400 were in employment services. 20% of all those people were involved in integrated employment services. That means, if my math is roughly correct, about 1,400 people out of 7,400 people are in integrated employment services. And of all of that big number, we're talking only 9% are employed. We're talking less than 700 people are employed in a system that is working with 7,400 people. It kind of really, to me, I mean, if you want to flip that around, that means 91% of the people aren't employed, and which would put it about 6,700. Bottom line is that means that clearly we have a long way to go, and there's a lot of work ahead of us. And at this point in this, I can hear providers jumping through the phone right now, screaming at me, going, "Mark, you're a provider. How can you be throwing us under the bus? We're doing great work. We are doing amazing work." And we're absolutely right. Providers today are doing a better job, I think, than ever. We see it all across this state. You know, just to rattle off a few, you know, I see what a Chief Human Services down in Yuma is doing. I see what the Douglas ARC is doing down in Douglas. Beacon Group down in Tucson. TCH over in Tempe, and I would be really remiss because I know I have some employees on this webinar. Gompers is doing a great job. But the bottom line is we've got pockets. We have individual groups that are doing great things. Statewide, we are falling short. And that's why this is really important to coming together as a group to figure out how to move employment first. And providers are such a critical key point to that. And when I'm looking at this, is that we've got to make sure that we don't sugarcoat things, okay? I think it's very, very easy to pick out the isolated feel-good stories. You know, we all see the stories when we start talking about employment first, and we talk about employment for individuals with disabilities, and especially those who have the greatest challenges on a day-to-day basis. We see those feel-good stories where that single person, you know, is employed at a Walmart, and every single employee at Walmart is happily jumping in to assist with toileting every day and to assist with feeding. Or we see Joe or Sally's mom and dad, you know, that are bankrolling their entire employment job that they wanted to create. And I think that we need to look at this issue, all of us need to look at this issue very realistically. And we need to look at the rules, not the exceptions, because it's very easy to find the feel-good exceptions. We need to be honest with each other, because if we're not honest with each other at our base level, where we're starting, I don't know that we can get to where we really want to be. And that's why we've come together as a planning group. That's why we've made this commitment. I applaud the state of Arizona. I applaud everybody who's spending so much time. Every single person on those planning groups has other things that they're doing. And yet they've all agreed to come around the table, to talk, to plan, to put this forward. And I want to mention that really quickly. They came around the table to talk, and I should rephrase that, because every one of us has been on way too many committees that talk way too much for way too long and don't get a darn thing done. I think the great thing about this group that's come together is that this group has said, we're not doing this if we're only going to talk. We're doing this if we're going to actually see actionable items and we're going to see outcomes. But in order to see those outcomes, we need to be honest with each other about what the situation is. Because when I'm talking with fellow providers, the things that I hear and the things that we need to take a look at as we're putting some of these things in place is that, especially, and we're talking those folks because this is my world, is we're talking those folks who are living in the DDD world right now. All right, we realize there's other areas and there's other components, but right now I'm talking about providers who are in the DDD world. Many of us work with those individuals who have the most severe disabilities, who have the greatest number of challenges to overcome, and we need to look at that realistically. Many of us are serving individuals who have production levels at 50%, 25%, 10% or less of the, you know, of a person who's working out in the field right now. We need to look at the reality of the fact that we are working with a business community that all too often won't even open its doors for us to talk to them about all of the amazing things that our individuals can do. That's why I'm so excited about the direction of what Untapped Arizona is trying to do, what Linkages is trying to do, is really drawing in the business community. But we need to be realistic when we're looking at this about how many businesses we really need to work with and get the word out there and educate them. Sadly, it does all come down to dollars and cents, and we need to be honest with each other that at this time, and I think that we need to really underline that, at this time, there is a lack of monetary resources for supports. It's really exciting to hear what Massachusetts is doing and that they've made a monetary commitment to this as well. It's not all about the money, but let's face it, none of this gets done if there is no money. And so we need to look at that, and we need to advocate on behalf of our individuals, and we need to press the legislature, and we need to talk to our leaders about the need for this. We need to look at the system that we work in, I think. You know, we've talked about this, we joke about it, but it is really serious. Well, too many times we work in a system that is inflexible and can squash creativity because there's not a code for that. And we understand billing, and we understand that there are requirements. But we need to figure out, how do we incentivize creativity when there isn't a code 36542 to apply that to? The other thing that we need to do, and this talks about funding as well, is that we need to make sure that the rates that we're paying providers, that we're paying families, that we're paying individuals align philosophically with what we're trying to accomplish. It's interesting, we're going through the rates or the rate basing, and there were rates which did not align with what we were saying philosophically. How can you say we want to move towards community employment, integrated employment, when we're raising the rate for center-based and we're lowering the rate for group-supported employment and integrated employment? We need to make sure that everyone's on the same page. I was so happy that we had some parents on here. You guys are heroes to us all, and you are, to me, one of the real key components in this. We need to work with our parents. We need to educate our parents. We need our parents to accept that their sons and daughters can fail, and that's okay, and that's all right. And that's a very, very scary thing, and I don't walk in your shoes, so I can't say and imagine trying to move beyond those fears. But without you, the parents, the rest of us, the state, providers, the schools, we're going to fail. And so we need to make sure that our parents are on board. We also need to face the reality that we work with individuals who in many cases can only work a very limited number of hours. And that's why I was glad in some of the earlier presentation about some of the other states talking about building in those things. What do we do when an individual is not able to work? And oh, that's right, they're able to work a very limited number of hours, but they have to be between the hours of noon and 3 and only on Mondays and Wednesdays every other week, because that's when group homes can get them there. And we need to think about those things. And we as a system need to think about those things, but I'm asking every provider that's on this phone to also think about those things. And I'm asking you guys to think about them, because I think too often we as providers go through that list that I had and we throw up our hands. We see them as dead ends. We're like, oh, well, there's no money to provide the supports, or oh, our guy is only making 10% productivity, so poof, we don't need to do employment. And we can throw up our hands because we're viewing each one of those as dead ends. And I think what we need to do as a provider community is come together and see those as obstacles. Obstacles that need to go around them, we need to go over them, and at times we're going to need to stick dynamite under them and blow them up. But we need to see them as obstacles, not at dead ends. I've been talking about this whole employment first at Gompers with our staff, with our board of directors, and realizing this is such a monumental task. Absolutely a monumental task. And the way I've described it is that we're really trying to turn around a cruise ship in a bathtub. That's what we're trying to do, because at the end of the day, I'm going to ask everybody on here to really keep in mind that we can't vilify providers for the services that are being provided. All right? One of the things that to me was most disappointing, or I don't even think it was one of the things that was most disappointing, it was the most disappointing thing in reading through the DOJ ruling, and not the DOJ ruling, but reading through the newspaper reports about it, or reading about Oregon's, or those sorts of things, is to read the way in which providers are characterized. We're characterized as sweatshops. We're characterized, I mean, we're just short of basically chaining people to desks and beating them. You know, that's where things are. And I'm going to bring it home. Gompers didn't create center-based employment. We did not create the concept of center-based employment. We were asked by our parents, by the state, by the individuals who take part in that program and are very, very happy coming to that program every day, to create this. And so now what we're doing is we're being asked to break down this model that we've been asked for years and years to provide, and we've implemented best services. So make sure that we're coming at this in a positive tone, that we're not blaming for what happened yesterday. We're looking for new solutions for tomorrow. And I think that's what we need to do. And that's why I'm so excited about today, and that's why I think today is such a phenomenal starting point, because we need to come together. We need to work hand in hand. We need to be honest with ourselves about where we've fallen short. And I think most importantly, because I think too often we overlook this, it's very easy to point out where we've fallen short. We need to highlight where we've succeeded, because we can build off of those successes. And we need to find the little itty-bitty employment services place in Greer that's doing a phenomenal job, and Gompers that's sitting at I-17 and Glendale Avenue needs to learn from them. And we need to take what they've learned. We all need to be willing to get a little uncomfortable and look at the old way of doing things in a brand new light. And that's scary, but we need to do it. I think one of the great things about today was we need to educate ourselves about what other states have done. We need to partner together to create a strategic plan that enables everyone to be successful. And I think the two most important things for me is A, we need to make sure we cannot forget about choice. And that's the right of the individuals that we're all trying to serve to determine what they, not we as a group, want to do with their lives. And I would also ask, if there are any individuals on this webinar that are receiving services from DDD or from RSA or from behavioral health or for anybody with regards to it, speak up. Now's the time for you guys to stand up and say, this is what we want, this is what the direction we're going to go, this is how we're going to make it successful. And honestly, I think if we can all do that, if we can all play a very small part in this, gosh, guys, we might just pull this off, and we might actually be successful at it. But it's going to take collaboration, and I'm really asking my fellow providers to take a look and be open-minded and really work together with everybody, because we all agree with this. Philosophically, there isn't one of us that disagrees. So thank you very much.
Mark, thank you. Thank you for those challenges, for those kudos, and for the realities that you addressed. And speaking of realities, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Leva, who is going to take us to the next steps and talk a little bit about what that's the royal y'all, on the phone and out in the communities, all of our stakeholders, and what role you could play. Mike?
Thank you, Linda. So what are the next steps? Well, we're going to start with a series of regional forums. The regional forums are designed to provide information about employment first. It's really about acquainting stakeholders with the issues, to develop a shared understanding of the goals of employment first at the local level. Most importantly, the forums will provide an opportunity to hear from individuals, families, advocates, and Arizona stakeholders to help us gather information to develop a strategic plan that can contribute to greater employment opportunities, which has been shared during this webinar. We realize and recognize that each region is unique in its attitudes towards integrated community-based employment due to economic variations and conditions and the availability of resources. It's also important to provide an opportunity for their participation and to receive their input. We've heard from grassroots organizations and individuals, especially self-advocates. They tell us that it is very important to ensure that everyone's voice is heard. Family, job developer, teachers, self-advocates. We want to encourage high schools and transition counselors with a focus on transition from high school to the world of work. We also want individuals with developmental disabilities to participate in the regional forums. The forums will be formatted to encourage dialogue. We're going to ask questions such as, what is employment success for individuals in Arizona? What types of assistance should be available to achieve that success? What does an effective employment support system look like? So hopefully we'll be able to gather input from all of those folks, the stakeholders that will be attending. We plan to have a series of 6 regional forums. We will begin those forums in June and July. We've identified 6 communities: Flagstaff, Lake Havasu City, Phoenix, Sierra Vista, Tucson, Yuma. The specific venues and dates will be announced in May, so all of you that are participating in the webinar will receive information. And we really want and need your help to help us spread the word and encourage stakeholders to attend and participate. After we complete the regional forums, what we plan to do is incorporate data and information collected and convene the strategic planning group. We're going to develop an outcome-driven strategic plan. We're going to ask questions of ourselves. Where are we? Where do we want to go? How are we going to get there? How do we know if we're doing a good job once we get there? And will we ever get there? But I feel that we will. We're also going to research best practices. Linda had mentioned earlier that Arizona is either 26 or 27. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. We're going to be able to identify what has worked best in states like Illinois, Oregon, Florida, Washington, Ohio. After that, we're going to conduct more community outreach because we want to obtain a broader input. We're going to make opportunities available online for individuals to comment. We want to open the door to let individuals share and let us know what their thoughts are, what their concerns are, what the issues are. And we also want to provide an opportunity to recruit additional stakeholders. I mentioned earlier about obtaining online input. We want to set up an electronic communication mechanism so that it will consist of a message board, a listserv, or social networking program and platform. After we conduct the community outreach, we are going to finalize a strategic plan, and by doing that, we'll be able to have a plan that, again, is outcome-driven. We also plan to supplement forums with technical assistance, including such topics such as data measurement, evaluation, accountability, public agency systems change and policy, funding, which Mark talked about, paying for what we want, creating incentives, transition, so important, post-secondary education, career advancement, family and individual awareness. What are the expectations? And again, just providing training and technical assistance. So what are your roles? Stakeholder roles. Become involved, become an active participant, and encourage others to do the same. Create awareness with employers on the value of a diverse workforce. Educate others, educate the community. Make sure that everyone knows what Employment First is and what it can mean for Arizona. Sorry.
Sorry, our computer's resting.
I just want to share the core team. We have 13 members who are part of that core team, and here is a list of those individuals. So many of you know who they are. You can use them as a conduit for the development of the strategic plan, or if you would like to become a member of the core team, absolutely, we welcome your participation. We'd like to give special thanks to Tom Uno and John McDermott from the Institute for Human Development, Northern Arizona University, for making this webinar possible. They did an incredible job of helping us, hand-holding, answering 2,000 emails, 100 phone calls, and so we absolutely appreciate their work, their coordination, and their assistance. This webinar has been recorded, and it's going to be available for viewing. If you'd like to receive a copy, contact me. I will send out an email upon completion of this webinar to let you know where the link, when it will be available, and how it will be available.
That ends our webinar. We know that there have been questions. We are perilously close to being out of time. And if we haven't answered your questions, please don't hesitate to give any of us an email, and we will talk with you about it. Short of running over time, I think this brings our webinar to a close. I personally, this is Linda, would like to thank all of our presenters, and mostly I think I'd like to thank those of you who took time out of what I know is an overwhelmingly busy schedule to join us today. And we hope this has piqued your interest and that you are interested in joining us for this journey. It will certainly be an adventure, and you know, there's all kinds of twists and turns when you start an adventure, but we are very enthusiastic about it. We think it will have some really excellent outcomes for our Arizonans with disabilities. And with that, thank you so much. We will get in touch to all of you who received an email. We will send the link, and feel free to distribute that far and wide so other folks can participate and hear our next steps. Again, thank you so much. You all have a great afternoon and a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, Linda.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Oh, this is John from IHD. If people would like to input questions into the chat, we'll record them and hopefully get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks.